April 25, 1945, Dachau, Bavaria. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine and diesel as Private First Class Daniel Morgan of the 45th Infantry Division stared across a field dotted with temporary shelters. Little did he know that his encounter with a frail woman named Sarah Levin would transform both their lives in ways neither could imagine. What began as an act of protection would evolve into something neither of them expected, challenging everything they thought they understood about duty, sacrifice, and the human capacity for healing. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the account of how two strangers, brought together by the chaos of war, forged a connection that would eventually reveal the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit against impossible odds. In the closing days of the European conflict, as American forces moved through Bavaria, the 45th Infantry Division encountered numerous displaced persons. Among the medical personnel attached to the division was Captain William Hayes, who documented their efforts in his field journal. April 25, 1945. We established an aid station 3 miles southeast of Dachau. The advance units report large numbers of civilians in desperate condition, supply convoys still delayed, working with quarter rations for distribution. God help us with what we're about to face, wrote Hayes, his normally meticulous handwriting showing signs of fatigue. Private First Class Daniel Morgan stood 6 feet tall, with shoulders broadened from years of farm work in rural Pennsylvania. At 24, his serious demeanor and methodical approach made him an excellent medic, despite having completed only 1 year of pre-medical studies before enlisting. His unit commander, Lieutenant James Wilson, described Morgan as uncommonly steady under pressure, with a remarkable ability to compartmentalize emotion when treating the wounded. On that spring morning, Morgan was assigned to a humanitarian assessment team entering a makeshift camp of survivors who had fled eastward ahead of the German retreat. The American soldiers had been briefed to expect civilians in poor condition, but nothing prepared them for what they encountered. "The situation exceeds our worst expectations," noted Captain Hayes. "These people have been moving for weeks with minimal provisions. Many appear to have been prisoners previously. Their physical condition defies description. We counted 472 displaced persons in the initial survey, most requiring immediate medical attention. Among them was Sarah Levin, 22 years old, originally from Krakow, Poland. According to the sparse records completed that day, she weighed just 84 pounds and suffered from severe malnutrition, respiratory infection, and untreated wounds on her feet from walking without proper shoes. Morgan was conducting intake assessments when he first encountered Sarah. The brief medical form he completed noted, female, approximately 20 years, severe emaciation, possible tuberculosis, unable to stand unassisted. Priority 1 medical evacuation recommended. What the form didn't record was the moment that would later define both their lives. As Morgan helped Sarah onto a transport stretcher, she gripped his wrist with unexpected strength and spoke in halting English. "Please, my name, remember my name. Sarah Levin." Sergeant Thomas Cooper, who witnessed the exchange, later recalled, "Something passed between them in that moment. I'd seen Morgan process dozens of refugees that morning, all business, but this was different. He knelt down beside her stretcher and promised he would remember. It was the first time I'd seen him break protocol. For the next 2 weeks, the medical unit worked around the clock, treating hundreds of displaced persons. American supply lines struggled to deliver sufficient medicine, food, and clothing to the growing number of civilian camps throughout the region. The situation was compounded by bureaucratic challenges as military administrators attempted to identify, document, and determine the status of thousands of people from across Europe. Captain Hayes documented their difficulties in his reports. May 3, 1945. Medical supplies critically low. Have requested additional penicillin and plasma, but told to expect delays of 7 to 10 days. Temporary shelters at 160% capacity. Staff working 16-hour shifts. Maintaining records becoming increasingly difficult. During this period, Morgan volunteered for extra shifts at the field hospital where Sarah had been taken. Hospital records indicate he checked on her condition daily, bringing extra rations when possible. Her medical chart showed slow improvement, though she remained critically underweight and battled recurring fever. On May 9, 1945, as news of Germany's surrender spread through the Allied forces, the administrative challenges facing displaced persons intensified. Military records from the period show that the American occupation forces in Bavaria were processing over 6,000 refugees per week, attempting to establish identity, nationality, and repatriation plans for each person. For Sarah Levin, this presented a devastating problem. During her recovery, she had shared pieces of her story with Morgan and the hospital staff. Born in Krakow to a family of tailors, she had been separated from her parents and younger brother during the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto in March 1943. Her subsequent experiences included imprisonment in multiple labor facilities before escaping during a transport movement in February 1945. Military administration records from May 1945 contain numerous cases similar to Sarah's. Individuals with no documentation, no known surviving family, and no clear path to repatriation. The evolving Allied policy prioritized returning displaced persons to their countries of origin. But many Jewish survivors expressed grave concerns about returning to regions where anti-Semitism remained virulent. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Peterson, the officer overseeing displaced persons operations in the region, documented the dilemma in his weekly report. The repatriation policy fails to account for individuals who face continued persecution if returned to their countries of origin. We have identified at least 600 cases in our sector alone where repatriation may place individuals at risk. Current directives provide no alternative solutions. For Sarah, the situation was further complicated by her health. Medical records from mid-May noted, patient making slow progress, but remains at high risk for tuberculosis. Travel not recommended for minimum 3 months. Housing beyond hospital capacity required. It was against this backdrop that Private First Class Morgan approached his commanding officer with an unusual proposal. Military administrative records dated May 23, 1945, contain the first reference to what would become known among the unit as the protection marriage. Captain Hayes recorded the meeting in his personal journal. Morgan came to me today with a request I never anticipated. He asked permission to marry one of the refugees. The Polish woman, Sarah Levin, claims it's the only way to secure her safety and medical care. Says he can arrange for her to stay with his aunt in Philadelphia while he completes his service. I told him he's lost his mind, but he was adamant. Said he'd already spoken with Chaplain Brown about the procedure. The discussion escalated to Lieutenant Colonel Peterson, who initially rejected the idea outright. His official response, preserved in unit records, stated, "Request denied. Marriage to displaced persons for immigration purposes not authorized under current military regulations." What changed the Lieutenant Colonel's mind remains a matter of speculation, but Supply Officer Lieutenant Frank Mitchell later claimed it was Morgan's persistence, combined with worsening conditions in the refugee facilities, that eventually swayed Peterson. Morgan wouldn't let it drop, Mitchell recalled years later. He wasn't emotional about it, that wasn't his way. He just kept presenting the facts. The hospitals were overflowing, repatriation to Poland was months away at best. The woman needed ongoing medical care, he had family willing to sponsor her in America. When he laid it out like that, day after day, eventually Peterson ran out of objections. On June 12, 1945, military records indicate that Chaplain William Brown performed a brief ceremony in the hospital recovery ward. The marriage certificate, filed with both military administration and eventually Pennsylvania state records, listed the participants as Private First Class Daniel Morgan of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Sarah Levin of Krakow, Poland. Nurse Elizabeth Collins, who witnessed the ceremony, later described it. "It wasn't romantic, if that's what you're asking. It was practical, almost like a business arrangement." He stood by her bed in his uniform. She was still too weak to stand for long. They barely knew each other. The chaplain kept it short, and when it was over, Morgan shook her hand. That's what struck me. He shook her hand, not kissed her. I remember thinking, well, that's the strangest wedding I've ever seen. What followed was an unprecedented sequence of administrative proceedings. Morgan's marriage to Sarah established her status as the spouse of an American serviceman, triggering a different set of regulations regarding her care and eventual transport to the United States. Medical records show she was transferred to a military dependence recovery facility, where she received enhanced rations and priority medical treatment. Captain Hayes noted the improvement in his medical assessment. June 29, 1945. S. Morgan showing significant improvement, weight increased to 97 pounds, respiratory infection responding to treatment. Recommend continued convalescence, but approved for transport to military-dependent facilities in France when stable. During this period, Daniel Morgan continued his duties with the medical unit, visiting Sarah when his schedule permitted. According to Nurse Collins, their relationship remained formal and distant. They would sit together awkwardly. He would bring her books, English language primers mostly, and they would work on her vocabulary. There was kindness there, but not what you'd call affection. They were strangers who happened to be married. By August 1945, Sarah had recovered sufficiently to be transported to a military dependence facility in Paris, where arrangements were being made for her eventual journey to America. The paperwork process was complex and lengthy, requiring multiple affidavits confirming her identity and relationship to Morgan. Military records contain Morgan's formal request for family separation allowance to be directed to Sarah's maintenance, along with copies of correspondence with his aunt, Martha Winters, in Philadelphia, confirming arrangements for Sarah's accommodation once she reached America. I've prepared the second bedroom and found a physician nearby who specializes in respiratory conditions, wrote Winters in a letter dated August 10, 1945. The Jewish Relief Society has been most helpful in offering assistance for her settlement. I still think you've taken on an enormous responsibility, Daniel, but I admire your compassion. Your father would be proud. On September 2, 1945, as news of Japan's formal surrender marked the official end of the global conflict, Sarah boarded a military transport ship bound for New York. Daniel remained in Europe, where the 45th Infantry had transitioned to occupation duties. The separation would last another 11 months, during which their only connection was through letters. Few of these communications have been preserved, but those that remain in family collections reveal the unusual nature of their arrangement. From Sarah to Daniel, October 14, 1945. Your aunt has been very kind. My English improves each day. The doctor says my lungs are much better. I have gained 12 pounds. I hope I am not a burden to your family. I will find work as soon as I am permitted. From Daniel to Sarah, November 30, 1945. No need to rush finding employment. Your health must come first. Aunt Martha enjoys your company. She's written to me saying you've been helping with her sewing projects. I'm glad you're settling in. My deployment should end by summer next year. Their correspondence maintained this formal, almost businesslike tone, focusing on practical matters rather than personal feelings. As Sarah's health improved, she began taking English classes at a local community center and volunteering with the Jewish Relief Society, which helped other displaced Europeans resettle in Philadelphia. Martha Winters documented Sarah's progress in letters to her nephew. She's transformed, Daniel. When she arrived, she was like a ghost afraid of her own shadow. Now she's helping other refugees navigate the same challenges she faced. Her English has improved remarkably. She's even gained enough confidence to take the trolley alone. In August 1946, Daniel Morgan received his discharge from the army and returned to Philadelphia. According to Martha Winters' journal, their reunion was awkward. Daniel arrived yesterday. Sarah prepared a special dinner to welcome him, but they're like strangers to each other. They're married on paper, but there's a universe of unspoken things between them. For the next several months, they lived in an unusual arrangement in Martha's Philadelphia row house. Daniel enrolled in pre-medical courses at the University of Pennsylvania under the GI Bill, while Sarah took a position as a seamstress at Goldman's department store, utilizing skills learned in her family's tailor shop. Local community records from the Beth Shalom Synagogue indicate that Sarah began attending services regularly, while Daniel, raised Protestant, did not participate. Their separate religious practices underscored the practical nature of their marriage. Daniel's college friend Robert Simmons later recalled the strange dynamic. "We all knew the story, how he'd married her to get her out of Europe. It was admirable, but you could see they were living separate lives under the same roof. He never referred to her as his wife, always as Sarah. When a few of us visited their home, they were polite to each other but distant, like roommates rather than spouses. This arrangement might have continued indefinitely had circumstances not intervened in a way neither could have anticipated." In January 1948, Sarah received a letter from the International Refugee Organization that would alter the trajectory of their lives. The letter, preserved in family records, informed her that her younger brother, Eli Levin, had been located in a displaced persons camp in British-controlled Palestine. He had survived multiple camps before being sent to Buchenwald, where American forces liberated him in April 1945. Since then, he had been searching for any surviving family members. Sarah's reaction to this news was documented in Martha Winter's journal. She collapsed when she read the letter. "I feared she might be ill again, but they were tears of joy. I'm not alone, Hans," she kept saying. "I'm not the last one." The discovery precipitated the first major crisis in Daniel and Sarah's unusual marriage. Immigration restrictions made it nearly impossible for Eli to come to America, with quotas severely limiting Jewish immigration. Sarah became determined to go to Palestine to reunite with her brother, the only family she had left. Daniel's response, described by Martha Winters, revealed the complex nature of their relationship. Daniel was stunned when Sarah announced she wanted to go to Palestine. "What about our arrangement?" he asked her. It was the first time I'd heard him acknowledge their marriage was an arrangement. Sarah just looked at him and said, "The arrangement has served its purpose, hasn't it? I'm well now, I have my work permit. You've fulfilled your obligation." What followed was the first documented argument of their marriage. Martha Winters described leaving the house to give them privacy, but returned to find Sarah packing a small suitcase, while Daniel sat silently at the kitchen table. "She told me she was going to stay with a friend from the Relief Society while she arranged passage to Palestine," Martha wrote. Daniel didn't try to stop her. I asked him later what he was feeling, and he just said, "I don't know. I didn't expect to feel anything." Sarah moved out the next day, taking a room with a family she knew through the synagogue. Over the next 2 months, she worked additional shifts at Goldman's to save money for her journey, while corresponding with officials to arrange necessary travel documents. During this separation, something unexpected began to emerge. Martha Winters noted in her journal, "Daniel came home late again. Third time this week he's gone to the synagogue's refugee assistance program after his classes. Says he's just helping with translation for new arrivals. But I wonder." Community records from Beth Shalom Synagogue confirm that Daniel began volunteering regularly with their Refugee Support Committee, using his medical knowledge and experience with military bureaucracy to help newly arrived displaced persons navigate the healthcare system. Rabbi David Goldstein, who oversaw the committee, later recalled, "Morgan was a curious case. Not Jewish, no particular connection to the community, yet he showed up consistently to help. He had a way with the bureaucrats that got results. When I asked what motivated him, he just said he understood what it was to be lost in a system not designed for your needs." What neither Martha nor Rabbi Goldstein knew was that Daniel had also begun writing to Sarah. These letters, discovered decades later among Sarah's personal effects, reveal a profound transformation occurring during their separation. From Daniel to Sarah, February 12, 1948. "I've been thinking about what you said before you left, that our arrangement had served its purpose. You were right, of course. I made a promise to help you reach safety, and that promise has been fulfilled. But I find myself wondering if there might have been another purpose neither of us recognized." From Sarah to Daniel, February 26, 1948. "Your letter surprised me. For nearly 3 years we have lived in the same house, yet I feel I know you less than I knew the other women in the camps who shared their stories in whispered voices at night. We have been strangers to each other, bound by a document, but not by understanding. What purpose do you imagine that could serve?" Their correspondence continued through March and April, growing increasingly personal as they began to share experiences they had never discussed while living under the same roof. Daniel wrote about the nightmares that followed him home from Europe, the faces of men he couldn't save, the camps he helped liberate. Sarah shared fragments of her experiences during the war years, stories she had been unable to verbalize before. Martha Winters noted the change in her nephew. Daniel received another letter from Sarah today. He's different after reading these letters, more present somehow. For months after returning home, he seemed to be looking through everything rather than at it. Now there's a focus to him I haven't seen since before he enlisted. On April 20th, 1948, Sarah wrote what she intended to be her final letter before departing for Palestine. My passage is booked for next month. I feel I should thank you, Daniel, not just for what you did in bringing me to America, but for these letters. Writing to you has helped me find words for things I thought would remain forever locked inside me. Perhaps that was the other purpose of our arrangement, not just physical salvation, but a pathway back to being able to connect with another person. Daniel's response, delivered by hand rather than mail, suggested meeting in person one last time. Community records from Beth Shalom show that they met at a fundraising event for European refugees on April 27, 1948, their first public appearance together in months. Rabbi Goldstein observed them that evening. They stood slightly apart from the crowd, deep in conversation. I'd known of their unusual circumstances, of course, but seeing them together that night, something had clearly changed. There was an intensity to their interaction that hadn't been there before. What was said between them that evening wasn't recorded, but the outcome was, Sarah postponed her departure for Palestine. She moved back to Martha Winters' house the following week, though now occupying the small third-floor room rather than sharing the second-floor bedroom with Daniel, as they had in their previous arrangement. Martha's journal entries from this period suggest a transformed dynamic. They sit together in the evenings now, actually talking to each other. Last night, I overheard Sarah telling Daniel about her family's Passover traditions from before the war. I've never heard her speak of her life before. Daniel listened like each word was precious. Something has shifted between them, though I'm not sure they recognize it yet. Over the summer of 1948, their relationship continued to evolve. Community records show they began attending cultural events together. Daniel accompanied Sarah to Shabbat services occasionally, while she joined study groups with his medical school colleagues. They were building something neither had anticipated, a genuine connection based on shared experiences, rather than obligation. In September 1948, Sarah received approval for her brother Eli to emigrate to America, rather than her joining him in Palestine. The changing political situation following the establishment of Israel earlier that year had created new pathways for family reunification. Martha Winters documented the moment Sarah shared this news. Daniel was studying at the kitchen table when Sarah received the telegram about Eli's visa approval. She burst into tears, and without hesitation Daniel went to her. They stood holding each other for the longest time. It was the first time I'd seen them embrace as true partners, rather than reluctant actors in an arrangement. Eli Levin arrived in Philadelphia in November 1948. Synagogue records indicate the community organized a welcome celebration, during which Rabbi Goldstein observed another significant moment. When Sarah introduced Daniel to her brother, she said, "This is my husband, Daniel." Not "this is Daniel" as she had always done before. The way she said "husband" with pride rather than explanation marked the culmination of a transformation I had been watching unfold for months. The introduction of Eli into their household created new dynamics. Now 20 years old, he had survived experiences similar to Sarah's, yet emerged with a different temperament, more outgoing and demonstrative despite his ordeal. His presence further catalyzed the evolution of Sarah and Daniel's relationship as they united in their efforts to help him adjust to American life. University records show that Daniel helped Eli enroll in technical courses at a local community college, while Sarah's employer at Goldman's arranged an apprenticeship position for him in their maintenance department. Through these shared projects of building a future for Eli, Sarah and Daniel found themselves functioning as a genuine family unit for the first time. By spring 1949, nearly 3 years after their unusual marriage began, the transformation was complete. Martha Winters made a final relevant entry in her journal in April. Daniel received his acceptance to medical school today. When he told Sarah, she cried and said, "I'm so proud of my husband." Later, I overheard them discussing whether to look for their own apartment closer to the university. They were talking about our future, not his future or her future. The protection marriage has become a real one, though neither could have imagined this outcome when it began. On April 25, 1949, exactly 4 years after their first encounter in Bavaria, Daniel and Sarah held a small private ceremony at Beth Shalom Synagogue. While legally they had been married since 1945, this event, attended by close friends, Eli and Martha Winters, represented their personal commitment to each other, chosen freely rather than born from circumstance. Rabbi Goldstein, who officiated, later reflected, "Theirs was among the most meaningful ceremonies I ever conducted. Not because of any grandeur, it was quite simple, but because of the journey it represented. Here were two people who had experienced humanity at its worst, yet found their way to trust, connection, and eventually love." The conclusion of their story extends beyond that ceremony. University records confirm that Daniel completed medical school in 1953, specializing in pulmonary medicine, a choice influenced by Sarah's ongoing respiratory challenges from her wartime experiences. Sarah expanded her skills beyond seamstressing, eventually opening a small tailoring shop with her brother Eli in 1954. Their family grew in 1956 with the adoption of 2 orphaned children whose parents had been displaced persons themselves. Community records indicate ongoing involvement with refugee resettlement efforts throughout their lives. Daniel's medical practice became known for treating recent immigrants, often pro bono, while Sarah's shop provided employment opportunities for newcomers with sewing skills. The broader significance of their story lies in what it represents, how human connection can emerge in the aftermath of unimaginable circumstances. What began as a practical arrangement born of chaos and desperation evolved into a genuine partnership that helped heal wounds neither thought could be addressed. As former Sergeant Thomas Cooper reflected decades later, Morgan did what many of us wished we could do. He found a way to bring some small measure of justice to an unjust situation. But what none of us expected was that in trying to save her, he would ultimately find salvation himself. Their story reminds us that even in our darkest hours, the capacity for human connection remains our greatest strength. In the decades following the global conflict, thousands of protection marriages were documented across Europe, as Allied soldiers sought to secure safety for vulnerable individuals. Most ended quickly, once their protective purpose was fulfilled. The Morgan-Levin marriage stands out not for how it began, but for how it evolved, from protection to partnership to profound connection. Historical records confirm that Daniel and Sarah remained married for 47 years, until his passing in 1992. Sarah continued their shared commitment to helping refugees until her own death in 2001. The Morgan-Levin Foundation, established by their children, continues their legacy today, providing medical care and educational opportunities for refugees worldwide. The transformation that occurred between April 1945 and April 1948, from strangers bound by a document to true partners bound by choice, offers a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and its capacity to find connection even in the aftermath of history's darkest chapter. As Sarah herself wrote in a letter to Martha Winters in 1975, "What began as an act of kindness became the foundation of my life. Daniel once told me he married me to save my life. But the truth is, by allowing me to rebuild my capacity to trust and connect, he gave me back something even more precious, the ability to truly live." And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.